Fred Jones was a 26-year-old young man who lived a happy and vibrant life with his parents. He worked in a carpentry workshop and was very skilled at his job. He also planned to propose to his girlfriend, Emma, whom he loved dearly, the following year and start his independent life completely. Fred's mother was a homemaker, and his father worked at a tax institution and was set to retire in a few months. Fred's father, Mr. Jones, was an honorable and honest man who had never made a mistake in his entire career and performed his job correctly. He was known for his integrity and honesty at work. One day, after finishing work, Fred was driving home in his car. Everything was as usual. Fred was listening to his favorite music on the radio. Meanwhile, he glanced at the ring he had bought to propose to his girlfriend, which he held in his hand, and smiled, thinking about how happy he would be living with his beloved Emma. But it didn't take long for everything to change, and all these dreams turned into a nightmare. A dreadful event awaited him. He had a severe accident with another car on the road. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. After that severe accident, before Fred could realize what had happened around him, his vision blurred and he lost consciousness. Sometime later, the phone at home rang. Fred's mother, who was cooking, went to answer it. When Mrs. Jones picked up the phone and heard the news that her son had been hospitalized, she was shocked and pale. They were informed that a drunk driver, who had almost lost consciousness, had collided with Fred's car, causing a severe accident. Mr. and Mrs. Jones rushed to the hospital in fear and haste. The hospital specialist told Fred's parents that, unfortunately, his condition was not good. Due to a severe head injury, he had suffered a brain hemorrhage and needed immediate surgery. Fred was eventually rushed to the operating room. Mr. and Mrs. Jones waited anxiously outside the operating room for hours, when suddenly the door opened and the doctor came out. Fred's parents hurried towards him. The doctor, with a tired voice, said, "Our team did everything they could, but it all depends on the patient's body's response. We just have to hope." Days passed after the surgery, but there was no sign of improvement in the patient. Poor Fred remained in a coma. A long time passed, and the doctors lost hope for Fred's recovery and had discussed organ donation with Fred's parents several times. The doctor invited the parents to his office and said, "Unfortunately, I have to tell you that saving Fred's life is no longer possible, and his vital signs are getting worse day by day. He might only survive for a few more days or even less. I suggest you fill out this form to prepare your son for organ donation before he dies, so you can participate in a good deed and save the lives of one or more dying people." Hearing these words, Fred's parents' eyes filled with tears, and it was unbelievable for them that their son's life was ending. On the other side, Mr. Jones's entire body started trembling with immense grief and fear. He suddenly stood up and slammed the doctor's desk, saying, "No, I won't allow you to do this." He couldn't think straight anymore, and making a decision about this was difficult for him. In the end, he left the hospital in anger and fear. He got into his car and drove home. Along the way, he kept crying and talking to God. He kept praying and, with a trembling and sorrowful voice, said, "God, I have never asked you for anything in this world, but God, you are my only hope. I beg you to bring my son back to us and give him a new life. He finally reached his destination and entered the house. All the while, he wandered around in confusion, his mind occupied with the issue, constantly thinking about it. Suddenly, he said to himself, "No, I won't let them harm my son." He went to an old chest, took out an old gun, and carried it with him, then quickly headed back to the hospital. Meanwhile, Mrs. Jones consented to Fred's organ donation and told the doctor, "I can convince Fred's father to agree to the organ donation." When Mr. Jones arrived at the hospital and entered his son's room, he was faced with a painful scene. He saw doctors and nurses preparing his son to be taken to the operating room. This act enraged the father, and he attacked the doctors and nurses, threatening them with his old gun. "If you touch my son, I swear I'll kill you all." The medical team quickly left the room upon seeing this scene. Mr. Jones, crying and wailing, went to his son's bed, hugged him, and kept saying, "I love you so much, my son. You have to get better. God, please help me." Meanwhile, the hospital management called the police and explained the situation. After a few minutes, a police SWAT team entered the hospital and stormed into the room, attacking Fred's father. Mr. Jones shouted, "If you come any closer, I'll shoot." Mr. Jones moved his fingers closer to the trigger, trying to shoot out of his intense anger. The police team warned him that if he didn't surrender, they would be forced to shoot him. But suddenly, the doctor shouted, "My God, the patient's vital signs have returned, and his hand is moving. It's a miracle." Hearing this, his anger suddenly subsided, and he dropped his gun to the ground. As Mr. Jones was forcibly removed from the hospital room by the police, he cried out, "Thank God! I entrust my son to you." Fred's father was sentenced to 10 months in prison by the court judge for carrying a weapon. Finally, the awaited day arrived, and Mr. Jones's prison sentence ended. When he walked out of the prison gates, he was met with a scene that every father dreams of. He saw his son, along with his fiancée and his wife, Mrs. Jones, waiting by the car with a bouquet of flowers to welcome him. With tears of joy in his eyes, Mr. Jones walked towards them and whispered, "Thank you, God, for bringing my son back to us. I believe in your miracle."